Alright, so what's going on, everybody? Thanks again for coming on back. I wanted to do something a little bit different this time with my channel. I wanted to actually go over some React things, maybe explain some things that might confuse a lot of beginners. I know when I first started, I always struggled with basic things, and I would follow tutorials, and I feel like a lot of them kind of expected you to know a lot of things beforehand, or just didn't really explain them in a way that I could understand. And so I'm trying to just create a small little app with you where hopefully I'll be able to explain a lot of the logic and things that are going on in React and a lot of common things that you'll see around. So a lot of times you'll see the same thing over and over again, and it's just the basic React lifecycle. It's not really meant to be extremely difficult, but there are a lot of parts in there that can confuse people, and so hopefully I'll be able to explain a lot of that. So today, this is the application we're going to be building. It's not super pretty. It's really not. I don't usually use Bootstrap, but just for styling purposes, so that I didn't have to spend a lot of time doing custom styling with style components or less or Sass or anything like that. I wanted to just use something that was already pre-made, and so Bootstrap is always really good for a very quick mock-up, and if you're pretty good at it, then you can make a pretty amazing website. But I just use the basic stuff on it. So over here, what we have is a to-do list, and I know you're probably tired of doing to-do lists, but they're a great way to actually use as much functionality as possible in a short amount of time. So great basic application, doesn't require a lot of thinking. So what we have here is we have basically an array of items here, and the items have two properties. You have a title and then you have a description to your item. So currently, as you can see, these over here, these three are pre-generated. They're basically just saved in state, and then this is a new item that gets added in. So as you click it, you're gonna see a very ugly styling that I did, kind of just a rush job, but you click it and then that basically tells you that it's now completed. And I'm gonna show you later, but that's actually a Boolean value that basically takes in a true or false and changes the styling according to that. So, and it does it for all of them, turns on and off. And then up here we have our input form, and the form over here is going to have a little bit of validation, nothing really strict or crazy, but basically if you hit the add button here and there's nothing inside the validation or inside the input, you're going to get this little warning over here. So please include a title, and please include a description, and then it goes away. So there's a lot of times when people don't think about user experience, and so they'll just leave those little error messages there, and for me, I hate staring at them. Like, it gave you enough time to read it. I think I put it for like 5 seconds. After that, you probably don't want to see it anymore. So, and then let's say that, let's see, give to the bacon foundation. So I did that. And then as you can see, this down here wasn't filled out, so I still get that little error message. So pretty much the validation works, and also it didn't submit. As you can see down here, that give to the bacon foundation didn't make its way down here. And then let's just type something in here. The foundation loves bacon, so why not? Alright, and so as we add it, it comes right down over here. Now, the order of things is because we're using a form of a push method, basically. We're not really doing the push for this. We're more so using a map. But because of the order of how we're adding everything, we're kind of spreading in what's already in state. And then after that gets in there, we're going to be adding in the item. So because of that, the new item is always going to come in last. Now if you want to switch that over, because we're not using push, it's very simple to just slide that code on over to the top, and then it'll just pop up here. So what we're going to do is to start off over here is first we need to get create React app going. So if you don't have that going yet, you can just install that globally. I won't go over that. You can just go into React's documentation. I love sending people over to documentation whenever they have a problem, just because you'll learn a lot more that way. And I think that being able to read documentation is very important. So, alright, so I'm using Yarn. You can use NPM for this, whatever you like. But I'm going to be using Yarn, so I'm going to be typing in Yarn, create, and then say React app, if I could spell. And then I'm just gonna call it, actually let me make a folder first. I always do this. So let's say make directory, and then we can call this to do application. Alright, and then we'll cd into to do application. And a lot of people don't seem to know this for some reason, but if you type something in here and you know that it's already in the list, you can just hit tab and then it'll auto-complete a lot for it. I believe if you're using Mac, it's very case sensitive. Windows doesn't really care. The Windows get bash doesn't really care, but if you're on Mac, then you'll have to at least take the case sensitivity into account. So alright, now we can do our original plan, which is yarn create, and then we'll say React app, and then we'll just call this client. That's just the name of the folder. That doesn't really matter too much. You can call that whatever you want and it'll generate it. So then we just hit enter and it installs everything. And then from there we can just start it up. You can start it with whatever editor you want. You can use Atom, you can use VS Code, you can use whatever you're comfortable with. Notepad++ if you want to be a savage. I actually started with that like I think 2 years ago, and so I kind of have a nice warm place in my heart for it. Alright, so to start it off, I'm just gonna type in code and then a period on there. If you're not able to do that, you have to set a path to have code to have your git bash be able to do that. And usually during your initial install, it'll let you handle that. A lot of people install it without even knowing. Okay, so I'm gonna put that over here, and I'm basically gonna shut down this server over here. We no longer need that one. So what I'm gonna do, however, is I want to bring in this link for Bootstrap, and you can get that just by coming over here to let's say Bootstrap, and then clicking over here, get started, and then you can just grab this CSS link. This is all that I put in there. I didn't put in the JS or anything else, so we can just ignore all of that. Alright, let me close that up, and then I'm gonna close this one up too, and we're just gonna be staring at this nice little screen over here for a little bit. And we're gonna come over here into our publics file. So basically when you first build a React application using create React app, you're gonna get a few folders. You're gonna get your node modules, which is pretty much all the dependencies and packages that go into React as a whole and create React app, and they're just kind of bundled up into this nice ginormous folder. So if you open this up, you're gonna see a bunch of stuff. Even deleting this folder takes a while just because of how much stuff there is in here. You never really have to go in there. Rare occasions you might have to for some specific reason. Maybe something broke or something isn't finding the proper directory and you might have to use it. But for the most part, you'll never really have to go in there. But it is good to just explore in there and see what kind of stuff is in there. Okay, so another folder that you're going to have is this publics folder. So this public folder is going to have your fav icon, which is, if you go up here to the top of your browser, a lot of times you'll see little icons up here like this Google icon. So that's what your fav icon is. And then you're going to have a manifest.json, which pretty much just has some information about your site. A lot of times you don't really need to dig into that. For this application, you won't need to touch any of that, but it's always good to look in here and maybe Google what the manifest.json is. And then we have our index.html. So if you've done HTML and CSS and all that fun stuff, then you'll be pretty much familiar with that because it has all of the same things. It has the doc type at the top, the HTML, along with the language that's going to be used. Funny thing is you can change that to like French or German or whatever. And what that does, it's kind of an accessibility thing. So it lets the browser know what language your stuff is in. For like screen readers and things like that. So a lot of the nice little hidden gems are basically stuff that'll help accessibility. So it's really nice to know about those things. And then you have your links over here. So I do want to drop that bootstrap link that I collected earlier and just put that in there before I forget. But all of the basic other stuff that's over here, you should be pretty familiar with. And we can pretty much remove all of this just to kind of clarify what a few things are. So this right here, this no script thing, all it's basically saying is that if somebody were to go into their settings on their browser and turn off JavaScript, because that is an option, this over here would basically prompt them to turn it back on, because this application won't work without it. React is basically completely written in JavaScript, so same thing with a few other frameworks and libraries. They're going to be completely written in JavaScript, so if that's not included, then a lot of things are going to break. Alright, so now the one thing you will notice if you have not opened a React application before is the fact that we only have this one div over here, so ID root. And basically what's going to be happening is, if you can imagine a let's say a waterfall or something, and you basically have water coming down, and as it's coming down, it's getting funneled into this little tiny hole, and it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and until it's just one little droplet. So that entire droplet just kind of goes into this ID root. So the entire React application just eventually gets smaller and smaller as you start passing things into components, and eventually it will basically sink down here. Now, what I do want to do before I start, and this is going to be stupid as heck, but I don't care. I don't care, and the reason why I don't care is because I think it's very essential in order to understand how React works. But I'm gonna open up the crowd favorite, which is MS Paint. So if you think this is stupid, feel free to skip it, but I think it's very important. So basically we have a square here, and then let's just say that now we're gonna put in let me just put in a red square over here, or a rectangle, and then we're gonna have some blue stuff. Well, I guess that's blue now. I don't know how to use Microsoft Paint anymore. So we're gonna have some blue stuff over here, or red stuff over here, and then we're gonna have let's say some green stuff over here, and then that green stuff, that's okay. There we go. Okay, so then we're gonna have let's say a title over here, and then we're gonna have some content. So basically, this is a website. So what we're looking at right now is a website. We're looking at a website that's built in components. So when you hear about components in React, or in Vue, or in Angular, any type of framework or library like that, you're gonna hear a lot about building in components. And so when we're building in components, we have to think of things in pieces that we can reuse. So there might be some data over here in this navigation bar. It's usually just a bunch of links and stuff. It'll be like my account, settings, things like that. But in some cases, you might have, like, say your user wants to know, you want to keep track of how many likes they have on their post or something. Maybe a reputation counter or something like that. So we have our reputation counter, and we put that over here. So now it says, hey, user, whatever your face is, you have like 20 likes, and it keeps track of that, or maybe even notifications or whatever. And let's say that information is kept up here. Now this up here has the user's name, maybe their email or something like that, some profile data that you would want to put up there when they're chatting with their friends or whatever. And then over here in this little part of the component, you might want to also have the same data. So you might have your likes up here, and then down here you have your likes as well, so you can see it in two locations, or displayed in a different form or something like that. So basically that's building in reusable components. So you can have certain things in one location, and because you built them in a reusable way, where the data itself is dynamic, like you could just reapply it over here. And then on top of that, you can have multiple pages that'll have the same type of components. Like this right here can be a card. Let's just consider this whole big green block a card. So if I'm on another page, I can, because I didn't hard code any of that in there, I can just reuse that and just import it into this other page and then just fill it in with the data that I want. So I don't have to rebuild it, restyle it, do all this other crazy stuff. I can just reuse it and just drop it in there. So that was just something really quick that I really wanted to go over, because I feel that a lot of people tend to kind of either not understand it or just overlook it, and that can cause a lot of issue in React. So look up building in components, just if you are a little confused by that. Alright, so the only thing that I am going to install from the packages, and you don't have to do this is not a requirement by any means, it's just a library that I really like, or a module that I really like, and so I'm just going to add that in there. And I'm going to cd into client, make sure that we're there, because that's where our package.json is, and I'll go over that in a second. But I'm going to do a yarn add React reveal, and all it is just an animation library. So when you saw those error messages earlier, it helped it just kind of fade in and stuff, and made it look really nice, but you don't absolutely need it. So alright, so we're taking our first look at the package.json. So package.json, and you usually won't see this little latest thing pop up. That's more so one of the extensions that I have that tells me if something's out of date. But package.json will usually come with some information about your site already. So in this case, it auto-generated the name based on what you gave the folder. So I gave it client, so it came out as client. We're in version 0.1.0. That'll sometimes change based on how many iterations you do. It tells you your dependencies for this. Currently, React comes with React DOM, and React scripts. And then it comes with some scripts for you. Now, the scripts are very interesting because scripts allow you to do a lot of things that may not come stock with Create React app. You can use it to like run multiple servers at once concurrently. You can use it if you're doing backend. You can use it to spin up your migrations and basically rebuild your database every single time you spin it up. You can use on the back end something called NodeMon, which lets you basically do hot reloads on your server every time that something changes. So pretty cool stuff. It pretty much watches your stuff. So then we have a few extra things over here. We have the Lint Config. You may or may not have that. I don't know if that's everybody. Not 100% sure whether that's just my setup, but then you have a few other little settings over here. A bunch of stuff you don't really need to touch. It's really just extra cool stuff that you have there. Now, if you install something like Vue or Angular and stuff, you'll still have a package.json. It'll just most likely be a lot bigger than this and have a lot more details and stuff in it. But as you add packages and dependencies and everything, it'll generally find its way in there. So speaking of which, I don't see my React reveal in here anywhere, so I'm probably gonna have to re-add that again. So let's just do that again. So yarn add React reveal, just to make sure that I didn't mess that up. And there we go. Alright, so React reveal made its way in there this time. So it's a good thing to go back and check on these things, because sometimes you might make a mistake and it just won't pop up in there. Alright, so the git ignore. This is something that a lot of people don't really talk about. If you've ever pushed something up to GitHub and you found that it was going for like minutes, just like thousands of files and stuff, chances are you don't have a git ignore. And if you do, chances are you don't have this in here. So what this does is the git ignore's entire job is to not send up things that you don't really need to GitHub. And in this case, I don't want the entire node modules file to go up there, just because it's a pretty huge file. So every time that somebody would have to download it, they're downloading like entire gigabytes and stuff of data. They don't really need that. They can just easily clone and download your project and then cd into it and just do a yarn install or npm install, and it'll get them everything they need. So Basically make sure that you absolutely have this. Git ignore doesn't have to look like this. There are different variations of it, very easy to find online. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, we can start off with the project. There's just a few things that I want to clean up. For one, we're not going to need this logo, but you know what? Let's just start this off so we can see what it looks like, just to have a good visual. So we're gonna give our terminal a command here, and you can use both the integrated terminal, or you can use your git bash, or whatever they call the Linux and Apple iOS terminal. You can use those. It doesn't really matter. I just happen to like to use the integrated terminal. So we're going to give it the command yarn start. And where that's coming from is this package .json. So we have the scripts over here. So scripts, you can just kind of look at it as a shortcut for yarn or npm. Sometimes you'll see people type in stuff like yarn run start. Oh, wait. Would you like to run another port? Yeah, sure. So basically, because I had my other one open, it asked me to do it in a different port. But you can look at this script as yarn run start or npm run start or something like that. And then, you have your start here. You also have your build command, which will build your application. You also have test, which will test your application. And I've never actually looked at what eject does. I don't really, from what I heard, it can do some pretty bad damage. So I will eventually look into that. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it alone. Alright, so we have our application running. Everything's spinning around. It looks really nice and stuff. I actually happen to like this little splash screen or whatever you call it. But there's certain things that we're going to have to do. So we're going to end up breaking it right now because we're going to delete this logo here. We don't need that. So it's going to break your application, and React has some really great error messages. So over here it tells you no such file and directory is logo.svg. So that broke our app. That's completely fine. The first thing that I want to actually do is I want to centralize a lot of our stuff, and I want to keep it into a separate folder from the root directory. So I'm going to create a folder called components, and you don't really have to do it this way either. There's nothing saying that you have to set your file structure like this. I just like to separate my components from everything else, and eventually as your applications get bigger and stuff, you'll create subfolders and all this other stuff, and it's completely up to you how you do this. So one thing I want to do is get rid of this logo, and because I am using Bootstrap and I'm already in this app thing, let me just build out some of this stuff here. So notice that right now, actually before I even do that, let me go over the basic React application. So this is a basic component, and you'll notice on line 1 we're importing React from React. So this is an import. So basically what we're saying is we have React installed, and we can see that because we come over here, and what we're doing is we're reaching into this package right here, and we're pulling out a component from there. So we're saying that we want you to grab this item here from this location. So grab it from the React module that we installed, and then basically what that allows us to do is to use things like JSX. So if you're looking at this over here for the first time and you've never seen it before, it looks exactly like HTML, but it's not HTML. In fact, if you actually push this up to GitHub, it'll give you a lot of high 5 points just for using a lot of JavaScript, because essentially what this does is because of Babel and stuff, it compiles to JavaScript down the line once you actually go into your browser. But as of right now, it's meant to look like HTML and all that, and which I think is really nice. It kind of helps with the learning curve a bit, but you'll notice some slight differences, such as the image source is using these curly brackets instead of just using quotation marks. So basically that's the way that you can make something dynamic. So if I were to have let's say const logo equals hello or something like that, and that was an image like hello.jpg. Instead of having to pass all of hello.jpg, I could just pass logo right in there, and it would basically grab it from there. So there you go. So we got logo spinning around, and you see how it has a little broken image in there because it can't find what logo is, because it's not really an actual image, it's just a word. So I can just change that to let's say hello world. Nope, it don't want to change. So it doesn't want to change, so I'm sorry. Honestly, I didn't even expect this to happen, so that kind of surprised me too. But alright, so there we go. So we can delete that now, and then we can pretty much delete everything in here. I'm going to type in my own stuff right now, and some of it I'm going to explain later. For right now, I'm just going to, you can either follow along or just watch or something. And I'll also post the code below in case you want to actually look into the GitHub and maybe see anything. But we're going to start off. I'm actually going to use some Emmet. So if you don't know what Emmet is, it's kind of a pre-filled thing for you. So I could just type in period.container and it'll populate the entire thing for me, so I don't have to type everything out. And then another one for a column, and this is all part of Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is going to come up with a lot of the styling for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. Keep in mind also that this application is not the prettiest application. I didn't spend a lot of time styling it at all, because that's not really the main focus of this. So I don't want anybody getting a little bit too crazy with styling. So over here, what we did is we have a container, and the container is basically going to wrap the entire application. And then we're creating a column, and in that column we're giving it one row, and that one row is going to be the H1. So, and this H1 is going to be our title. So if we were to save this now, we're going to have that title up there. So eventually I'm going to want to create another component. For right now, what I'm just going to want to put out here is just let's say a list. You know what, ul and then li, and again I'm going to use some Emmet and just do like times 6. So, and then another cool thing is if you actually click on one location and then you hit control and then just click on other locations. I think on Mac it might be command, if I'm not 100% sure about that, but we're just going to type in one message over here just to have something pretty to look at. So there we go. So as far as the CSS for this is concerned, we're not going to get too crazy into the CSS. The only thing that I want to bring in is just a little piece over here for that complete trigger. So when you click on it, it just puts the ugly X through there. So, and you can just pause this and drop this in there. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about CSS, just because that's not what this course is, or this video. Alright, so now we're going to get into the actual meat and potatoes of this, and what I want to do is I want to put my components. So this right here is an app component. So what I want to do is slide that on over up here, and also same thing with the CSS. And you notice that my application broke already. We expected that because we're moving stuff around. So now we have that in there. So we need to go into index.js, and now we need to tell it that application or our app component has moved to this location. So as soon as we added that in there, it popped back up. Alright, so coming back over here, there's going to be a few components that I want to start, and I'm going to be doing them in small pieces. I don't want to just introduce a bunch of them all at one time. So we're going to start off with just a task.js, and in React we use capital letters over here to represent components, kind of as a way of just saying that that's a component, so that anybody that walks through there just sees that. Alright, so this is going to be a functional component, and I'll go over a class component after this, but for right now just know that this is going to be a functional component. It's going to look a little bit different from the other one just because I'm going to be using ES6 for this one, but I'll explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Alright, so over here I'm using ES6 in order to make this component, and what that basically means is instead of writing the keyword function, I'm just dropping this into a variable and then passing in a basically an object property. So instead of saying something like props, I know a lot of people have seen that, or doing something, I don't know. You know what? I'll go with props right now, and then I'll actually that way you can see what props is doing, and then I'll switch that up so that you can see like my preferred method of writing it. All right, so now we're gonna be just doing a little bit of basic styling. So we're gonna start with our class, and it's gonna be card, and then we're gonna have MB2, and then P-1, and that's pretty much it. We're gonna add a little bit more to that though, but dot card body, and then we're gonna have a card title, all right, and then this card title is gonna take in an H4. You know what? There we go. Sorry. So H4, and for right now we're just gonna call it title. And then from there we're gonna slide down. Right now we're below the card title, so we get to add our let's say card body, and then here this one's just gonna be a P tag, and then we're just gonna say this is the description. I can't spell the description, so this is the description. Okay, so the last thing that we have to do, and you'll see my linter is yelling at me over here saying that it's declared but its value is never read, which basically means that it wants you to export it out and do something with it. As of right now, this component is pretty much done, but there's nothing going on with it. And then you'll see over here that we also didn't use the props, which basically what it's telling us is that all of this is hard coded in there. We're not passing anything to another component. And so when you think about why you want to pass something to a different component, you can go back to this ugly illustration of mine. Basically, if the data lives in this little box over here, it's going to be pretty difficult for it to make its way all the way to this little box over here. But what if they shared a component somewhere in between that, such as this web page? So if I passed the data from here and then kept going back until I got to this main black box, then it could go out and then back into this little component over here. Now there are other better alternatives and solutions for that, such as Redux and stuff like that, so you don't have to keep sending your data from basically this purple box to this red box to this blue box to this black box and then to this green box, brown box, purple box. There are solutions for that, but essentially that would be what you would have to do if you didn't want to use Redux. Okay, so, and that's why we pass a lot of props, so that we can make this reusable in case we want to grab this piece of data and use it again, which I will show you in a little bit just how we can make something reusable. So we have our task, and then I'll actually just put this in here so that you can see what it looks like. So import task from task, and then we can pretty much get rid of this over here. Actually, there we go. So now we can just bring in task, and that's gonna break because I can't spell. There we go. So that's gonna bring in task. So as you can see, it has our little title, and then has our description. So everything that we hard coded in here. So if we change this to new title then it's going to be the new title. But that's not what we want, because that doesn't look like the application that we were working on earlier at all. That just looks like some really weird mess. So how do we pass this around in order to only have to build this thing one time and still get those multiple lists that we had? So the way React will do it is generally you can pass what's called props, and that's why we have this up here. This is a property of this component. And so I could say something like props.title over here, and then we can say props.description over here. So right now, if I do that, it's going to be completely empty because it hasn't been defined yet. So I could come over here and just say title equals, and then I can give it a value. I don't even need those. I can actually hard code that in there. So I can just say title, and then description equals description, and so it'll be defined over here. Generally, you don't really want to do this either. You'll usually have some form of state up here, something like basically a box of data of some kind that you'll pretty much get it from, such as an array or something like that. And we'll go over that in a second too. I just wanted to show you how passing props is basically done in React. So just to reiterate, we have this over here. We have our title, and then we have our description. And we can refactor this and make it a little bit prettier too, just because I don't like to have to keep writing the same thing over and over again. And so I don't like the fact that props that props pops up multiple times. So if your application is like pretty big, you're going to be typing props over and over and over again, and that just gets annoying. So what I'm going to do instead is actually do some destructuring here. So we have title and description. And so what we're saying is we're explicitly telling React that we want to pass these properties over. So we know exactly what we want to pass. If those aren't passed, then we're kind of type checking ourselves so that we know that there's a mistake. If we end up passing something that isn't on this list up here, then React is going to yell at us and tell us something about it. So it's a good way to keep yourself honest. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I don't really want to keep this like this because it's not really very usable, because we could only use it one time. Now I could do something crazy like this and just say new title, and then new description, and then third title and third description. But you can already see that I'm already getting tired of doing that just to be able to populate it with more data. And it's not very effective. It doesn't change in any other way. So I don't really want to keep that in there. What I'm going to do, however, is just going to put my p tag back in there and just say description. There we go. So right now we're not passing this task. We don't even need it in here. All right, so we have our to-do app, our heading, and then this cool stuff down here. And let me just fix my little styling because I kind of messed up a few things here. Actually, no, I'll just leave it like that. Okay, so we're gonna make a new component, and we're gonna call this one task list.js. So task list is gonna be a class component. So what we're going to want to do with task list is basically we're going to want to import React again. So we're going to say import React, and there's two ways you can do this with class components. You can either just do it this way where you import React from React, in which case you would write your class like class task list extends react.component. Now, the reason why you're writing it like this, because I feel like a lot of people tend to miss this portion right here, is what it is React already has a class that's built out for you. So this component class is already built out within React's ecosystem. And so what you are doing is you're going into React and you're pulling that out, and then you're making an extension of that, and you're calling it class list. So if you've ever worked in classes before and you've used inheritance and all that, and you've built one class and then you built another class that inherited properties from that, and so on and so forth, then that's basically what you're doing here. They've already got very extensive classes that you can pull from, and basically that's pretty much what you're doing with this. So you're pretty much saying that I want this task list to extend some of the properties from that are coming from React.component. So you could do it that way, or you could just do it this way and then just say component, and then now you don't really need the React portion here. You could just do it like that. Personally, I don't really like to do that. Don't know why. I think I just like the way my classes look. So I think that's literally the only reason. So from there, we're gonna need a constructor, just like you would with a basic class. And if you haven't messed with a class before React and all that, I definitely suggest that you do that way before you hop into React. It's not really mandatory, but it's good to have some of that basic understanding before you start coding in React, because it uses a lot of classes. Now, React Hooks, which is the newer version of React, which was added not too long ago, does use nothing but functions, but classes are still a part of React's basic ecosystem. Alright, so what we added over here is we added state. So with state, that's a way that we can create a form of saving data. Basically, that's all this is. This is data, and data can change. Data can be manipulated, altered. You can have new data and everything, but this is pretty much your bucket of data. So just think of it as bucket of chicken. And so if you say you have a drumstick and you don't want a drumstick, you want to change it out for a wing, then what you're gonna do is reach into this dot state, and then tell it that you want to reach from this dot state, which is the big old bucket. You want to reach into this little bucket called task, which holds all of the drumsticks, and then you want to say this dot state dot task dot drumstick, and kind of just keep going through there and change it out. So for right now, what I want to do is hard code some data, and I'm just going to paste this in, and you can type in anything similar to it. You don't even have to type in this exact data, but we're just going to put this in there. And I'm just going to actually cut this down to, let's just cut it down to 2, just to simplify it. All right, so now we have our data, and we have our constructor here. So the next thing that I do want to start adding is our render method. So render, if you remember, it comes from React.component. Like I said, your task list is going to be an extension of React.component, which basically means that render is one of the methods that are in this class, in this component class. And so we're going to be using that. And what it does is it tells it to push this down the tree and eventually render this data out once it gets to the index component, the index.js. So once it makes its way down that flow and eventually makes its way in here, then it'll print it out. All right, so we're going to have our render method. And so we're calling render, and then there's some cool stuff that we can use in between the render and the return. So I'm not going to go over that right now, but eventually I will. So just hold on for that. So then we bring in our return. So I know the class boilerplating for React can be a little bit weird. You have your actual class initialization up here with your extension from React.component, then you have your constructor with the super, and then you have this dot state, and this dot state is taken in a list, and yada yada yada. And it really just takes repetitions. That's the best thing that I can tell you. Without repetitions, it'll be extremely hard, and you'll have to look at references a lot, or you just might be one of those geniuses that gets it on the first try, in which case I hate you, because I can't do that. So it takes a little bit. Alright, so what we're going to do is, we created that task component earlier. So what we're going to want to do is actually make that task component iterate through the items that we have in here to make it more dynamic. So remember before we had to type that stuff in and we could only get one at a time unless we copied and pasted, and that was just boring. I hated that. So we're gonna import that task component from task. So now we have that in here, and what we can do is come down over here and add our task. So there's a few ways that we can do that. We can just add that in there and do it like that and all that, but that's boring. I don't want to have to keep adding it over and over again. So what instead I'm going to do is, one, I'm going to do some destructuring over here. So what destructuring means, it's, if you think of it very similar to how this import is handled, where it's saying from the I want to get this from this location. That's the same thing that destructuring is. So basically what I'm saying is I want to get this, which is these this tasks, which actually put a little s in there. So I want to get from tasks, I want to get it from this location, this dot state. So import task from this dot state. It's the same as this thing up here. You can add more stuff in there in case you have more state. For right now, I'm just gonna leave that state alone and just do it like that. But eventually I'll start adding more stuff in there as our state gets bigger. And you can also do something like what I personally like to do with mock data is I like to create a separate file and just import it in, and then do a component did mount and all this other stuff to put it up there. But we're not going to be doing that over here. Okay, so now that we have the task from over here, what we can do is create a content variable. So we can say content equals tasks and ampersand, double ampersand, and then tasks dot map. So what I'm doing over here with this extra task and task, because I know that looks like a little bit of just weird syntax, but what I'm doing over here is I'm basically saying that if task exists, this is kind of like a very hacky Boolean statement. So we're saying that if task exists, then do this. Then do the following. We're gonna map through it. So if it doesn't exist, then this won't kick off. So hopefully that makes some sense. But essentially, this is more so of a test in case if you're getting data from a server or just massive amount of data that takes a little bit. Your component might mount without that data. And so this is basically going to say that if that data doesn't exist, then let's just move on and we'll get that later. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to pass item, and this is just a parameter. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter, but we're going to want to return some stuff. So basically we're going to say tasks and task.map, and then we're going to take item as a parameter. Now when we say item, that's another thing that I think confuses a lot of people, just iterating over an array of objects. So in this case, item doesn't represent a particular part of this array of objects here. What it represents, the way you can see it is it's basically representing each little curly bracket, each opening and closing curly bracket. So this would be item 0, item 1, and then so on and so forth. So what you would say is basically from here we can pass in our task component, and then our task component is going to want a key. So in React, if you don't give something, and I believe Vue is the same way, if you don't pass in a key, it'll still let you do it. In fact, I'll actually show you what it does in case you haven't seen it before. But it'll basically give you a warning, and that warning is going to pretty much tell you that it needs the key because of a iteration issue where it'll still render out the component, but there might be an error in there because it doesn't know which particular item you're talking about. So if I were to do this now, let's say let's close this off just like this. All right, so we have a component, we built it out over here. Now I want to actually use it. I can just come over here and say content and call that out, and then before I do anything else, I need to export this. You don't have to follow along with this part. I just want to make sure that you can see what it is that we're doing. So we have our content, we're mapping through everything. Basically we're saying iterate through this entire array of objects and then pass me each of the titles over and over and over again, which we can do one of these just so that makes sense. And then we're exporting task list, and we can bring that into our index through, let's see, sorry, it wasn't an index. We should be able to bring it over here. Okay, so we can we're gonna be bringing it into app.js. So we have task list from task list, and we're pretty much going to be dropping it down here. So now at this point we don't need to define anything. We don't need to tell it anything just because it's, oh, I broke it. We don't need to define anything or tell it anything just because it's already been defined somewhere else. Now the reason why this broke is because of my little content thing that I have over here. So instead of doing it like that, because it's a single item with a few other things in there, I could just do one of these, and there we go. So it'll render. So for right now, I misspelled something. There we go. So for right now, it's rendering this content over here, and the only thing that we're defining, even though if we go into our task component, we told it to expect a title and a description. In this case, we don't have a description, we just have a title, or at least we're just passing a title. So you can think of applications that you can use with that, like if in case you have a pre-made like button, like if this task right here was just a button and you wanted to use that button for multiple parts of your website, such as you have a portion that maybe that's a danger button that lets you delete things, or a warning button, or a sign up button, or something like that, and it's going to have different colors and, you know, different styling and all this other stuff, but you don't want to have to write the initial part down. You can use it like this, where you're only defining certain things that you want defined. So coming over here, we have our titles, and they're starting to come out. And I know that I'm going really slow, but I don't really care too much about building the application as much as I'm trying to more so go into some strict details that I think that are really important to a React application. Okay, so we have our task list, and it's finally rendering. And so now we can also add. And actually, let me open this up too, just so that you can see the warning that you'll get. So down here it says each child is a list, or in a list, should have a unique key prop, and then it gives you a location that you can look it up. But you know, the site is still working, nothing broke, and in fact, I don't think this will actually show up in production. But just so you know, in case you are getting that, you can just add your key here, and you can make the key whatever you want. A good practice is to make it the ID, just because the ID should always be unique, and you don't want something that isn't unique to be it. You can make it the title or description, but there's a likelihood that you might write the description or the title twice or something, and now you're gonna have some form of conflict, and that error message will make its way right back to you. So now we can pass in description equals item.description, and now we'll have our description over here. So really cool, we have our title and we have our description. So moving on, there's some more stuff that we actually want to do. I'm going to actually stop the video here, and what I want you guys to do is try to implement anything new that you want. Maybe add some more data in there. Just kind of experiment with it a little bit, see what else you can do with it, and then I'll actually upload the rest of the video probably sometime tomorrow, just so that you can kind of take a break and take in all the stuff that we went over, especially if this is your first time looking at React. And then we're going to be building the rest of the application. I didn't want to make this video too long, but it kind of seems like either I spent too much time talking, or just a lot of stuff to go over in detail, and I like to be able to be as thorough with the information that I give as possible and explain why we're doing certain things the way we're doing it. So with that said, just to reiterate the things that we did, we basically installed our Create React application and then put everything into our components folder over here, and then created a app.js, which our app.js, all it's doing is it's just a presentational component. So it doesn't have any state the way that this class does. This class has data that lives inside of it that we can change and draw from. All this is all application or app component is just a presentational component that handles styling and tells it everything where it wants to go. So it has a container and another div that's just a column and a row and a header. And then it's not even all the way until it gets down here where it passes some form of component that has data, which is our task list. And then we're exporting that and then just injecting it into index. So there are multiple ways that you can do this. You can completely get rid of that app component and just build it all into index or something, but I'd like to keep everything in its own little rightful piece and whatever. So with that said, if you guys have any questions or anything, if you hated the video, liked it or whatever, just let me know. This is my first time doing it, so anything that I can do to improve, feel free to just let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. I'll be honest with you guys, I have no idea how to stop this video.